You're listening to 101.1 FM WOPP-IP WDRV-IP WALE-IP Providence. I'm your co-host, Dhruv.
And I'm your co-host, Alejandro Jackson.
And this is the Outta Pocket Podcast.
Where we pull conversation topics out of our pocket.
And occasionally, go out of pocket.
Hi, welcome back to the Outta Pocket Podcast. We hope you had a wonderful spring break. You thought you'd see us next season? Think again. We actually didn't take another 40 days off. Yeah, we don't talk about that. No, that was tragic.
Yeah, it's been a busy semester for the boys in the podcast.
For sure. But we are back, and joining us today is a dear friend of the show, contributing to our batting point average of brown guests. And by brown guests, I didn't mean the university. I meant brown, bro. Let's go.
Let's go.
Is Rishika, as Dhruv earlier mentioned off camera, a Nobel
Laureate. Rishika will win the Nobel Peace Prize in 20 years. It's projected. It is foreseen.
Definitely
in her future.
Too long of a timeline.
My bad. I forgot. 7 years tops. Easy.
Yeah.
Now we're talking.
But on a serious note, Rishika is genuinely
serious, bro.
Oh, my bad. No. Rishika.
I can't believe you make jokes about the Nobel Peace Prize.
No, he's.
I wasn't gonna. Okay. I can't go down that path. It's too risky. I'd do anything for the bit, but for real, Rishika is a super impressive person and a dear friend of the show. She has given a TED Talk with 400,000 views, something like that on YouTube.
600,000.
600,000.
Oh.
My bad.
Excuse me, bro. Our podcast rookie numbers.
600,000 views on YouTube, and she's from the dear heartland of Colorado, up in the Rocky Mountains. Born and raised. So, yeah. Before we're starting the show, we're having a little chat about Gen Z, and I think we're getting started talking about. I don't know if you guys have seen the TikTok party, like Riz party videos that's come out recently. I don't know the full context about it, but the videos are very funny.
See, I don't know what you're talking about because I feel like Gen Z has just gone on for too long.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I'm Gen Z, but then I feel like I'm just out of the loop. And I feel like this is going to become a GTP receptor where next there's like, you know, Gen Alpha, Gen Beta, Gen Gamma, and then I'll just feel like completely left behind.
Oh, brother, what's up? Have you seen this? What's up, brother?
A G protein called receptor.
I'm from Generation Mu, brother.
No, Generation what?
Like, remember when mu used to be the friction coefficient, bro? What did you do? Actually, what did you do? Didn't you like write? What did you do on your physics? AP Physics.
Oh.
What did you do in the margins, bro? Was like.
Oh yeah. And on my AP Physics 1 exam senior year, it was pretty much just for the memes. After I finished taking the exam, I had some time left over. I think I started writing the lyrics to All-Star by Smash Mouth from memory.
Bro doesn't remember.
And then I did like Africa or something.
That's such a Gen Z thing to do.
You're kind of right, honestly. I also drew a really like graphically buff pumpkin.
What, bro?
I'll show you guys the lore. I'll tell you guys about the lore later. Actually, I'll just tell you right now. And for some reason, there was this substitute teacher in one of my classes.
Oh, brother.
On Halloween, he drew a pumpkin on the board, and then the pumpkin got erased when the actual teacher came back. And then I drew it again, and I'm like, oh, like, haha, like the pumpkin's back or whatever. And the joke was every time he erased it, he just kept getting stronger. And I just, like, keep drawing, like, increasingly, like, jacked versions of this pumpkin. And then I drew him on my, like, AP Physics and Econ exam, actually.
Yeah, that's crazy. And keep in mind, for those who aren't, who may not be, you know, under the terrible grip of the College Board, bro.
Yeah, this is true.
And do not have to take AP tests. This happened in May. So Broski was drawing this pumpkin for how many months?
It was a while. It was a while.
Brother. Brother, come on, brother.
You reached power level 9,000, bro.
What was I gonna say? That's yeah, I don't remember. But yeah, it's tragic, bro. I think meme culture is spiraling. It's fully out of. I used to like to think that I was down with the culture.
Mm-hmm.
I was up to date. Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah, it's true. That's weird. There was like a moment of time where I was like very locked in. And I like knew the memes.
Well, I mean, now half of us. I mean, I know you included are like deleting Instagram off your phone.
Yeah.
Things like that. TikTok might get banned. So I don't know. And I think just as you grow older, you become an adult. You have more responsibilities. Like
Mm-hmm.
you stay on social media less, and it's just a cyclical. Because now we're gonna become the adults that are like, I'm sorry, I don't know what that means. Like,
It's time for Generation Alpha to take our place and come up with the next onslaught of memes, I guess.
Although I don't know, like, not to make a conversation about memes unnecessarily academic or serious, but I guess I already did that. I took my first anthropology class this year, and I thought it was really cool to learn about how culture is formed and developed, and I think that what's more relevant than ever before is memes. But there is a piece written by Chuck Klosterman called Death by Harry Potter or something along those lines, and he basically talks about how in not keeping up with the culture at that time, which was hugely into Harry Potter, he's constructing his own generational gap and therefore like losing out on valuable connections, losing out on opportunities to connect with people. And on some level, I really relate to that because memes and pop culture were always devalued as intellectual enterprises versus something that was, viewed as like more intelligent or more academic, and as a result I think I sometimes struggle to connect with people, especially younger folks. So I wrote about this and I said I'm a pterodactyl slaying and getting slain.
Yeah.
But I wonder in the future if like people will start to pay more heed into what messages memes are actually sending, or like culturally what place they have.
Mm-hmm. I think that a large part of that process has already been like started. I think we also talk about this. I feel like this is not the first time I think this idea has come up on the show. I feel like we've talked about this before.
been here a while, man.
It is true.
I'm not gonna lie.
We talk about the internet a lot.
And not only that, bro. Like I grew a beard. Like when we first started the show, dude, I was naked faced.
Yeah, this
Like,
is true.
Time flies. Things change.
Things change.
To be honest, I know that. To answer your question, I don't remember, despite the fact that I'm usually the one who's like, remember an episode? What's up, brother? Remember?
What's up?
remember an episode 4,
You'll
brother?
recall the G protein coupled receptor.
I know. Well, no, I'm not. That's Adrian, bro. But yeah, I'm sure we've talked about like things like this. I don't know. I feel like in a number of years there'll be like books about like how memes were used for. Why am I gotta stop doing this voice? How memes were used for like, I don't know, to like spread like messages of like just like social justice.
Yeah, political messages for sure.
I mean, I already read a book sort of about that recently, Renegades by Trevor Buffoni, which is all about like TikTok and Dubsmash, and Dubsmash as a platform for minoritized
Dubsmash
communities.
is wild, yeah.
So yeah, I think that like level of scholarship's already like being unearthed, but I wonder if it's going to remain like a niche thing that people choose to partake in, or if it's going to become more widely accepted as a form of scholarly research.
Memology.
Just you wait. Nobel Peace Prize.
Skibbity toilet.
No, brother.
Me when I win the Nobel Peace Prize for the skibbity toilet.
It's Rishika, not you, bro.
Yeah, you're right.
You're on their blacklist. Which is the beginning of this episode.
Yeah.
For sure.
Anyway, speaking of generations, I got this. Okay, check this out. Speaking of generations, there are older generations than Gen Z. Contrary to popular belief, we are not the center of the universe, though we are the center of meme culture right now. Anyway, these older generations.
But do you know that? Bro, you know what dank ass memes the aliens got, bro? It's all fun and games until they pull up on the blog talking about
With Doge, bro.
like, you're like, whoa.
Oh man. Oh, I don't want to get off topic again. But I feel like at the same time, meme culture has progressed so fast. Like, I see something from like 5 years ago, or I see something from like 2 years ago, and it just hits me in the soul. I'm like, wow. Dude, do you remember Evil at Brown? This was before your time. But
I don't. You
Bro,
constructed
bro
generational
said
gap
before
again.
you
I have no
died.
idea what you're talking about.
That's crazy.
back in my day.
No, we gotta actually explain this. This is actually like pretty hilarious. Did you see Brown New Memes came back just to diss Brown Concert Agency?
No way,
About how
really.
trusted Lionel was.
That's crazy. I haven't seen.
They like posted like
I haven't seen the
a
post.
photo of the lineup. It was a story. It was like they posted just like a story of the lineup, and they were like, "The fall off is crazy," and I was like, "That's
Wild.
I'm like,
Wow.
"Nah, we still have."
So I want to know about.
Oh,
Whatever
Evil
you
at
said.
Brown. Do you remember how like this would have been your senior year of high school? There was a lot of memes that were like evil. I don't know.
It was
Like
it was like evil something, and then just the opposite of that.
yeah. Evil ratty be like good food.
Good food.
Stuff like that. Like evil Sili be like short. Like just
Yeah.
silly dumb shit like that. And there's an entire meme page dedicated to this, and it was
Evil
so
at Brown.
Evil at Brown. And like I forget how or why I remember this, but pretty recently I was scrolling and I like saw like an Evil at Brown post. Maybe it was on like my story archive or something, and I was just like, ooh, it was like Roblox like impact noise. I was just like, I felt like an old man. I'm like, damn. Yeah, I'm constructing generational gaps.
Yeah, this,
All right.
this entire episode is going sideways. We're just in meme culture now, bro. Is it still? You think it's still up?
Maybe. I feel like they did a little. All right, Evil at Brown. Evil Cab.
Evil Cab be like does its job.
Evil communal
Showers
showers
be
be
like,
like.
hairless.
That's crazy.
Evil Ratty be like door. This is literally like all of our fall of our freshman year was just Evil and Brown.
Oh man. Oh, this was so funny.
What even
Anyway.
is this? Evil Brown right now be like dry. Bruh. Evil Joe's mods sticks be like exist.
Evil Brown's caps.
Evil Brown caps be like responsive and available.
That's awesome.
I feel like caps was a lot. I mean, I don't
Worse
know. Your
2 years
caps,
ago.
but like when we first got here,
It was
people
bad.
with caps were not.
I had a pretty mediocre like experience with caps.
Which, in retrospect, this is a complete tangent. Again, this is all we do on this show. I'm not gonna lie. It's kind of crazy how far out of COVID we've come, because
Mhm.
the fact that we were able to get like a freshman year in person was crazy, but it was still like weekly tests, like, you know, masks up
Yeah.
at points. There was like an entire point where they like shut down Andrews.
Yeah.
To like go pick up meals.
I remember that.
And so
No in-person dining for like it was like a solid 2 or 3 weeks in like late September,
Yeah.
and there was just like stacks of like takeout boxes on top of trash cans.
yeah.
It's pretty wild.
But I say all that to say, like, you just look perfect full circle moment. The use of memes through time to show us how far we've come, and how I feel like caps, in retrospect would like to give them just grace.
Yeah.
It's like coming out of COVID,
It was tough.
it was like I would argue that the world hasn't seen something like that before. Like, I mean, obviously there have been pandemics. At the same time, it's just like, again, with like the power of the internet, it was like a lot more visible, the amount of people that, you know, like suffered chronic illness or even like died because it was a lot more visible to us, and et cetera, and I don't know, having the internet around and being able to be virtual kind of, you know, shaped our lives and
Mhm.
whatever. And so, and then just coming out of that, like living like that, and then coming out of that is like, it's quite the stark transition. So,
Yeah.
you know, it makes sense that they weren't so responsive and available. But this one still is true though. Evil Brown Wi-Fi be like works, bro.
True.
Brown Wi-Fi is terrible. I don't know. So, for the two of you, I don't know how long you were here in spring break. I was here until like the Tuesday of, and the Wi-Fi should have shut down for like an entire like 12 hours.
Wild,
bro. I was in the Stone Age, bro. I was like, what do I do? I should have like went to I mean, obviously I was on like my 5G data, but I was like, broski, like I was supposed to like I was doing work. I was like working on my resume and stuff. I was on Figma, bro, and like they were like, nah, bro, you can Ligma. I was like, that's crazy, bro. Please bring it back. And they didn't even send an email. There was no like, hey, like, sorry, we're fixing this, bro. What's up, bro? No, anyway.
What's up, brother?
Nah, I was just done dirty, but that was crazy.
I forgot about that.
Evil. Wait, I forgot about. Was it? Yeah, this is like a. Didn't they like find asbestos in Emwell or anyway? The deer. Oh, you don't know about the deer. Do you know about the deer? The Mochamp deer.
I've heard legends of the Mochamp deer.
Deer.
But I wasn't there to experience the Mochamp deer.
I took a nap during.
It was a weird ass week.
It was terrible. It was because it was a day. I remember because it was a day you, Rohan, and I went to.
Yes.
Jaska.
Yes. Yeah. There was a tornado warning, right? That day, I think.
I remember the deer and the bomb threat. And I went to sleep.
And I think I had a show of Rocky Horror that day.
Daylight savings was that day.
It was a weird day. Okay. Anyway,
stop.
Speaking of stark
back
transitions.
on track. Look,
speaking of stark transitions.
My bad. I didn't mean to derail you. You're good. So sorry. You're a guest on the show, and we've just been lost in the sauce.
This is why we're out of pocket on the podcast.
Speaking of sauce,
get the name from.
Rishika gave a very saucy speech at the TEDx conference that you mentioned.
We're working it. Speaking of stark transitions, getting old.
What?
Crazy.
I just did the transition.
No. You gotta let me cook yet. Old people, as they get older, have certain requirements. They have needs. And sometimes things are not accessible to match old people's needs. This is an example of accessibility issues, of which Rishika knows a lot about.
So
we pulled it off eventually.
I will say that one of the biggest accessibility issues that I see, particularly in things like healthcare communication, shouting you out, Plemy, is using too many words to describe something simple.
Got him.
Just wanted to put that out there. You know, no! Accessibility of communication. That was a very lengthy transition.
Rich said all that to say, yeah.
We talked about meme culture in that transition, bro.
Lacking. We really got an auditor sent to our podcast to like see how effective.
You guys are too out of pocket.
Your podcast is not accessible. Too convoluted. Too many tangents. Too many threads.
Anyway, tell us about it. Tell us about your TED Talk.
Okay,
that has 600,000 views.
Crazy, like, bro, like, damn, bro, I gotta drop them leading questions. Okay, how'd you get sort of inspired and involved in the, I guess, field or realm of accessibility?
Yeah, so I got inspired in the field of accessibility in general because I grew up next to the Colorado Center for the Blind, and I was just really inspired. I met a lot of friends and mentors, and I just thought it was really cool to see how people found new ways of communicating, living, being with disability and because of disability, and that really inspired me to re-examine how I was thinking about accessibility and how accessibility was thought about at large. And in terms of the TEDx talk, it was a really great experience for me to try and share some personal experiences and connect it to people who maybe had never heard about stuff like that. As I got more involved with the disability advocacy space, I felt really fortunate that I was welcomed and let in, but I thought that a lot of people that were hearing the message were people that already agreed with it. And so I think the goal of like public speaking, even things like this podcast, is to try and get people to reframe their idea from disability as inability to disability as a personal experience that offers a new way of viewing the world, especially for those for whom grew up in a context that had pretty ableist ideas of what disability means and does.
For sure. It's very touching that you would consider our podcast as reframing anything, but
meme culture, come on.
I think we contribute to
it. Yeah, exactly. We don't reframe meme culture. We just become memes.
But no, I think that's very interesting. I think I would say I'm nowhere near as versed in the realm of accessibility as you are. At the same time, something that's important to me. always happens on this show. Anyway, I thought I was gonna burp and I did not. But is that I mean I don't know how. I don't think I've actually talked about this too much on the show, but essentially, before I was CS and before I was a lot of things, I was engineering. So I went to like a magnet high school where I did like engineering for 4 years, and long story short, one summer I ended up in like a research lab working on like prosthetics, and so like that was like a good. I worked with them for like 2 years, and so that was like a good chunk of like. Well, I guess it was like a tenth of my life that I spent like as of right now, but as looking into these things, and so I think being able to peer through this window of like what people with disabilities go through, and then even when they're gifted things to sort of bridge the gaps between being able to maneuver the world, even then like the solutions we have still aren't like the greatest. Like, so for example, one of the things I spent a lot of time kind of looking at was like sensory feedback for like prosthetics, and like how like a lot of people who are equipped with the prostheses, upon like first getting it, if they like pick up a plastic water bottle, they might like fully just like crush it upon like just trying to pick it up, and so like because there's no like feedback that they're getting from interacting with the world. And so like how we can like work towards a tomorrow where that's like a possibility. And then after that, after a long series of career changes, I'm doing CS, and it's still just as important. Like accessibility is still just important, and making sure that your programs are like accessible to people who are visually impaired or to people who aren't able to like hear. So if you have like a video somewhere playing on your site, like, well, we have audio, but if you have a video playing somewhere on your site, like that there's captions or things like that. And so for sure. So I think it's very important. I think it's very cool. May I ask well, I know. So you're doing an IC, an independent concentration if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm doing an independent concentration in disability and design, and basically my concentration looks at why the world is as inaccessible as it is. I mean, you think about accessibility and it's obvious the first response is, oh, there's so many issues with accessibility, but I guess I'm really invested in understanding why. I was thinking about my own biases, and I would like to say that I always started having this optimistic view about what accessibility can be and do, but in part I was really afraid of getting older, and I was afraid of disability for myself, for my family, for people that I knew, because I didn't know any better. And now I know that that is sort of a very ableist approach to take towards thinking about disability justice or disability inclusion. But if that was my perspective, having grown up in an area that was very accepting of people with disabilities, I was interested in how we can manipulate our everyday environment so that people can have an inevitable experience of aging, their bodies changing, their ways of interacting with the world changing, but it being unlocking new ways of doing things, new ways of creating art, new ways of talking to people, rather than, losing the opportunity to do things the way that they used to. And it was interesting that you talked about sensory feedback, because something that I was really interested in high school was how neuroplasticity worked, which is basically the idea that your brain adapts to different changes and is constantly changing and rewiring itself. And that's particularly prevalent for people for whom lose vision, or people who are born blind. The use of their occipital or visual cortex changes. And I think that a lot of that hasn't been explored, but what is inciting to me about that is that there are new ways of even thinking and being that disability offers insight to, even if you don't have a disability. And I'm interested in using that as a way to catalyze innovation in my major.
Nice.
So yeah, everyone should do an independent concentration. It's really awesome. Another reason why I did an independent concentration was that I'm really passionate about special education. Mm-hmm. I come from a family of educators. My mom was one of my biggest role models, and she was in education. And the thing I really liked was how she allowed students to help themselves and also believe in themselves, and students succeeded most when they were able to take charge of their education. So one of the reasons why I chose Brown and chose my major was that I thought that Brown's philosophy of having people be motivated by their own end goals, pursue their own projects, and be able to architect their own education was at the crux of the individualized learning plans that I was seeing in special education, and I thought that I wanted to be an environment that embodied what I was trying to fight for in my volunteer experiences.
Have you thought about starting a podcast?
Have I thought about what?
Starting a podcast?
She has been on podcasts before.
Well, I'm sure you're better at this than we are. Goddamn, I feel. We're getting shown up, bro. No. You're very well spoken.
Thank you.
I think that's very. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. We're cooked. It's too late for us. I see.
Yeah, it's junior year, man.
done.
We're locked in.
Yeah, bro.
But to the youngins out there,
No.
first, subscribe. Second of all,
Well,
First, go watch Rishika's TEDx talk, bro.
I also think that you don't need to have an independent concentration to think like an independent concentrator. Just like you don't have to have a disability to benefit from what I see in the creativity of people with disabilities. Speaking obviously broadly, no one with a disability is lumped in a monolith. But I think what people with disabilities in my life that I admire are really good at is being able to view constraints as their life as a way to prompt more creative ways of doing things. Like I had a friend that I knew who had one arm and she had like the fastest system for tying her hair back and she had like 3 different ways to like slingshot hair ties, and that was like a simple idea, but it really carried through in every aspect of her life. Rather than viewing something as set in stone prescribed for you, thinking about ways that she could sort of bring in her own expertise and work around solutions to make them work for her. And so similarly, I think like an independent concentration is a very unique case, but a lot of people who could benefit from accommodations or who have disabilities don't even know that individualizing their education is a possibility. They don't know that they're allowed to advocate for things that would make their learning easier, that they're allowed to take charge of their learning, or that they're allowed to try and think about their learning in different ways that they can personalize it. So I think even within majors, you are able to make projects, for example, aligned with what you want to do in the future, or advocate for changing the format of something, or even advocating for trying to reimagine how the program is structured at your school. I think students have a lot more autonomy than people give them credit for.
For sure. I commend you for finding what you're passionate about so early, because I feel like it's something that I'm just starting to do now, is like what you mentioned, like interweaving things that I'm like passionate about or want to work on through my assignments. What was my last? Oh, like this is currently the like black sheep of the family right now, but like I give a speech in my persuasive communication class about Funk Night.
Oh yeah.
And but it was just like one of those things that's like, oh well, you know, it's an opportunity to talk about something that like I am like familiar with and like I care about and whatever. And so I mean that is very like not serious example of what you were describing. But I think I commend you for kind of being able to do that throughout the entirety of your academic career.
Did SAO nerf it?
What? I said nerf what?
Funk Night?
The last one?
Yeah.
Bro. Yeah.
They've been making enemies with everyone lately. I've heard a lot of clubs getting their events shut down because they didn't turn it in like ahead of 2 weeks or something.
I turned it in ahead of 2 weeks.
Oh no, I'm aware. You're very like
and
on top of that.
The long and short of it is, you know, basically they didn't give me like a rain location, even though it was free after 5 p.m. But they were like, there was like some conference in the space for like from like Wednesday to Friday, and because I'm not, I'd like to think that I'm quite a detail-oriented and diligent person, and I have quite a good memory, and I pretty vividly remember it being free after 5 p.m. on like the Thursday. They didn't give me a space, so I'm like, damn, okay, so I'm gonna have to move it. And I like email, you know, the SAO, and I was like, hey, I think we're gonna move it. And they're like, okay, sounds good. What date? I said April 11th. They were like, okay, I'll cancel the 4th. I'm like, okay. I can email the next day talking about, yeah, so like you didn't submit event registration forms for the 11th, so like
no,
you can't do this.
Wait,
and I was like, brother, I literally gave you the date. I was like, hey, how does April 11th sound? And there was no email that said, actually, that wouldn't work. There was no like, before you cancel, you can't do that. It'd have to be like, they let me cancel, and then they said, now we gonna cancel you, bro.
SAO are the ops for real. Like, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. But, you know, I'm just zen, bro.
Zen. Serenity now.
For sure.
Yeah.
But And so one of the things I thought to ask while you were talking through that last series of thoughts is if you have an experience with like, so something I think is interesting is like you're talking like neuroplasticity. From my understanding, I'm not too well versed in the field of neurology, but neuroplasticity is, what's the word I'm looking for? Let me rephrase. The brain is more malleable when people are young, is from my understanding. And so I don't know if you've had any experience with essentially people who are like born or become disabled early on in life versus people who later on in life experience disability, and like kind of what your experiences, if there are any, like you have with I don't know, just like the different ways they may navigate their disability.
Absolutely. I mean, you speak really correctly that I think they're completely different experiences, and the mistake is, again, using the word people with disabilities and having that as a monolith, because it's a personal experience and age plays a critical role in that. Mm-hmm. It's just like learning language, like in terms of learning mm-hmm. ASL, there's a critical period. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that I think our accessibility thought process, healthcare system in general is very reactive, which isn't a bad thing because, if you have something that is immediately impeding your quality of life, you'd want to fix it. But there's so much less attention drawn to preventative measures that I think people lose out on opportunities to really live more independent lives before it's too late. Like a classic example is Braille literacy, being able to read Braille fast. A lot of people who are losing vision are instead encouraged to only read print, and it's a very complicated decision that I'm not too well versed in because I'm not a teacher of students with visual impairments. But in that case, students should be exposed to both formats and at least learn both formats so that if their vision deteriorates, they're more able to read Braille proficiently rather than being pushed into the sighted way of doing things. Mm-hmm. There is like a misconception that the sighted way of doing things is the right way of doing things. Another interesting example is in terms of neuroplasticity, the way that I got into it was actually from a painting, which I talked about a little bit in my TED Talk, but I had a friend named Sarah who showed me this really cool painting by a Turkish painter named Esraf Armagan, and it was this really realistic painting of a waterfall, and Esraf Armagan was born blind, which was really interesting. How does he have such a acute understanding of depth and space and place, having no visual reference frame? And the answer was that he learned how to adapt his visual cortex very early on. But with things like this, I think the more children that have access to rehabilitative services, that have access to understanding that their disability doesn't mean that they're any less capable of doing things, but giving them space to explore different ways of doing things allows neuroplasticity to be more harnessed. I think it's a little cynical view of aging that, when you get older, your brain isn't able to learn new things, but I also think that we have to be cognizant that if we continue to have a model where only when people are severely ill or only when people are really struggling to have, activities of daily living, then we intervene, that's the completely wrong approach, as opposed to seeing how can we investigate how this person can continue to live a full life throughout and prepare them for when they do have a disability or, their condition becomes such that it's different than how it is now.
Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on this artist and you said worked on his visual cortex early on,
Yeah, so Esraf Armagan is congenitally blind, which means that he was born with no usable vision. Mm-hmm. And for people that are congenitally blind, I've found that it's a lot more easy to adapt to certain circumstances and to understand things that are visual in terms of other contexts. So in his case, his occipital cortex, they took an fMRI scan, and the visual part of his brain was lit up as he was painting, which was very interesting to me as an artist, and also how I got into tactile art as a form of rehabilitation. By doing hands-on activities such as painting, you are able to stimulate the visual part of your brain to do something else and socially integrate yourself somehow through the world, learning more ways of how the visual world is, which is really important. I mean, something that I didn't know about originally is this idea of image poverty, which is basically the idea that if the world is defined in terms of visual terms, but you don't have tactile alternatives to understand visual concepts, it becomes very hard to integrate yourself in society. Like I had a young student named Isaac, and I was talking about something, and I said, the elephant in the room. And he was really confused. He was like, maybe 5 or 6. And the reason why was because he had never seen an elephant. Now, to an elephant, for me, there's picture books everywhere of an elephant. But if you think about 3D models of an elephant, they're obviously more rare. Mm-hmm. And so just because of that, he was very much excluded from the conversation. This seems like a benign example, but then take something like math. If someone talks about X and Y axes and there's no tactile alternative, that becomes delaying in math. Or if someone talks about, oh, this is this many feet away when you're trying to go to the park, but you have no understanding of how long a feet or a foot is. That's why 3D models and tactile learning is increasingly more important, but because attention isn't paid to that when kids are young, it becomes very hard for them to socially integrate around them, and things like art and hands-on activities can help with that. Origami is being used a lot to help with orientation and mobility training, understanding spatial relationships, and helping people sort of make a mental map of their area before they go in, which is very crucial when you learn to do things without vision. And even simple things like, I'm trying to think of other examples. Yeah, I don't really know where I was going with that, but
I have a quick question going off of that. If the goal is to get tactile learning integrated into classrooms at an early age, what system do you think would provide like a sort of like win-win for all communities in your mind? Because in my mind it seems like I don't really know too much about how education works for the congenitally blind or sighted communities, but I figure it's probably like some sort of like similar to a special education program. So do you think are there already separate schools for those who are born blind, and is tactile education already a part of those curriculums? Do you think there should be blind children integrated into sighted classrooms, and tactile education should be more integrated into those curriculums? Would it be helpful? Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
yeah, I mean, that's a really complicated question because I think every person is different, and also disability and particularly visual impairment is a spectrum, right? So depending on where people are, they might be more fit to one school versus another. Obviously, if you go to a school specialized for learning for the blind or visually impaired, like I grew up near, there are that many more resources specifically tailored to your learning experience, and I think that can be very valuable for a student. But at the same time, I've had friends who grew up in those contexts that feel very socially isolated. Mm-hmm. So in terms of education system, I don't know if I have the qualifications yet to answer that question, but in terms of your first question, I think a lot of kids have tactile learning as they grow up. So I don't think that it's a availability problem, but a psychological problem. Every kid is like making models of things, painting, drawing, trying to like illustrate things. But as we get older, that form of learning becomes more taboo. It's seen as less professional, less academic, and I think people are straying away from their natural inclination to experiment, to create, to learn in that way. So I think reframing our idea of that being another mode of learning and offering multiple alternatives to students instead of just send in an essay, something as simple as send in an essay or make a podcast. Or in my biology class, when we were doing cells, having kids with the option to actually physically make a cell model or people to draw the diagram, having multiple options can really help students. I think in terms of tactile learning, the second thing is the stigma. I actually changed the, ethos of my major a lot because I was seeing all these accessibility concerns, and I was really inspired by design because as a volunteer, the misconception is that you help people, but that is sort of a sighted savior mentality way of looking at volunteering. In reality, you are learning from your community, and you're also creating an environment for people to use their existing strengths and capabilities to help themselves. And what better way than through design, because you're changing their environment so that people can live independently for the rest of their life. But I realized that there's a lot of people already working on that area, but it's that people, because there's a stigma around blindness, don't want to seek out those resources. They don't know how to ask for help. Especially in the medical field, there's an idea of disability as tragedy. So when people get their diagnoses, healthcare professionals don't tell them where to go. And there's the gap of knowledge so that people don't have access to tactile learning forms that already exist.
I think that part of the correct me. So let me compose this thought. Damn. I think parts of, or a concern that came up during your, like when you were just talking, is like essentially the socioeconomic status of different communities and like resources in schools. So like there are just like across the country there are different communities who like may not have the funding to like have models, to have like kits, like model kits for students to like utilize. And so I guess I don't know to what extent like some communities are really exposed to like tactile forms of learning because of like I would say because of like a money problem and because of candidly like things like redlining and et cetera and like having like especially minority communities like in these like places of a city where like you know their schools aren't well funded, you know, infrastructure is really poor, so you know when it comes to like internet access, like you know they may not have great access to like their internet speeds may be very slow. They may not have computers in the house. If they like go to the library, those may be very outdated. Don't you know have the capability to run some of the like newer softwares or things that could help them model things, even if it's digitally. And so, I feel like part of it is like I feel like part of the tactile learning experience is also just like having those things, like having those resources, and we're approaching it to see. Well, honestly, we're only a summer away. Dhruv and I always have this joke about season 4 is going to be the season where we rip all these like super nuanced, complicated topics. I guess transition.
Yeah, I mean, socioeconomic status is a huge factor. It's a big issue. It's an issue that I wish more people talked about, more people tackled. But one thing I will say is I think, in part, it is just larger issues of so many social problems stemming from fundamentally socioeconomic status. Like, arguably, disparities in healthcare, disparities in housing, disparities in food insecurity can all be traced down to this one very complicated topic. Mm-hmm. But I think, in terms of philosophy, there are things that we can do to make things more accessible for people who don't belong to more affluent families. And I think a part of it comes with how we approach design and disability. The reason why I'm not just a product design major and I'm a disability and design major is because seeing how communities, particularly communities with less resources, innovate really changes your perspective. As an undergrad, you're sort of only taught to use the fancy materials, right? You're taught to use a top-of-the-line technology without considering, will insurance pay for this? How will this actually get to communities? Versus with case studies, like the Jaipur foot is a classic example. It was a I don't know if you've heard of that. Prosthetic made not by, top-of-the-line engineers in their own right, but not how we would define them, but people who are just innovating in their community, trying to use the lowest cost materials possible to get something efficiently done. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the best innovations come. So thinking about how to mobilize the resources we already have to minimize waste, to create tactile learning opportunities is where we need to go, not necessarily building more things. Like one small example was that when I was working with a student over COVID had a lot of economic disparities. We were trying to figure out how to teach her math online. We ended up trying to put together a list for how she could use her own Lego set to rebuild tactile models for herself. So she already had the Legos in her house. We weren't creating more technology. We weren't doing anything. But that simple model could be used in a lot of houses for whom, when kids get older, Legos become waste. Now Legos are repurposed.
Nice. It's very nice.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have anything to add.
Oh,
it's just like, I told you at the beginning of the episode that Rishika is a brilliant person, scholar, and friend, and she's certainly exemplifying that on the show today, so.
For sure. Another, this is like, it's related, but not like, I think as deep. It's just like, I'm just curious as to some of the design classes you've taken like during your time at Brown.
Ooh, classes I've taken during my time. I think this...
Top 3.
Top 3.
Okay.
We gotta generate content somehow.
Ooh, okay, so, someone that I owe a world of gratitude towards is Professor Sarah Skeels. She teaches the Pathology to Power class, which is Brown's most famous, most popular disability studies class at Brown. And I think that it isn't a design class in terms of engineering, but it is fundamentally a design class in terms of design thinking. She goes through everything from how policies are made for people with disabilities, how we can reframe our idea of inclusion in healthcare, to how product design can be adapted for people with disabilities. And I feel like as an educator also, she exemplified some of the characteristics I'd want to see in a more inclusive pedagogy. So I owe the world to her. She's my concentration advisor, so I really appreciate her for that. I think secondly, I took Visual Arts 100, which is like the intro to design class, with a professor called Daniel Stupar, and I also loved how he encouraged my creativity in that class. He did what I was saying earlier about harnessing student passions. Like, I wanted my whole portfolio to be accessibility based, and he pushed me towards teaching me 3D skills that would help with that. Really also thought about the social context of art. The class wasn't about learning to paint, but it was who's going to see your work, how are we going to make this work more affordable, more accessible, really keeping in mind different communities and making art more equitable. And I loved that he infused that sort of like social stance into the arts, as well as was a really brilliant educator in that he taught us how to do what we wanted to do, but had prompts that were specific enough to get our gears going, but generalizable enough that people could really take their own creativity to it. And I really liked how he did the class. And then finally, I'm in a class right now called Choreodaemonics with my other concentration advisor, Sydney Skybetter. It's about the intersection between robots, dance, and socio-political forms of power and privilege. And I really like that class because it's fundamentally about examining the social and humanist lens behind emerging technologies. I think that's obviously important as a design major because so much of what you deal with is architecture, emerging technologies, AI, things like this, but also because the social context means everything. If you have a brilliantly engineered bridge that's, inconvenient for people to drive on, no one's going to use it, right? So understanding how people work and also like how to make design work for people that have historically been marginalized, I think is a perspective that's been forgotten. And I like that as a dean and as a professor, Professor Skybetter is like foregrounding that in the practice.
Bro, why? Anyway, what?
No, I just heard bridge and my mind went to a dark place, bro. I'm sorry. You're making some fantastic points.
I looked over at bro and bro was... I looked for 1 second, I was like, bro, what's so funny? And then I'm out here like... I was thinking Engine 30. Because I know that... But, we move.
We move. Anyway. Yeah, all good points all around. I'm sorry, I'm tweaking today.
No, that's very cool.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like you're balancing a lot of these like design classes, but you're also incorporating like I know very recently you're in Orgo right now. You're incorporating pursuits in other areas. How do you find yourself balancing your different passions? Do you find it enhancing your study of design engineering? Do you find it as a sort of like a long-term goal, like or a pursuit of another long-term goal? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think in terms of having a lot of interests, first it's just that I'm, for better or for worse, chronically curious and very distractible, so I like to learn as many things as I can. But also I received advice from someone that I admire a lot in the blind and visually impaired community that how she decided like what her passion is or what she wanted to do is taking her existing interests and applying them to a problem that she wanted to solve and people that she wanted to work with, collaborate with, empower. And for me, because of my personal experiences, I just felt very drawn to accessibility. So when I came to Brown, I knew that I wanted to work in the general area of accessibility, but what that was, I had no idea because I was 17, I had no clue. And I think a part of it is just being open-minded as to how different fields can connect to each other in one goal, because I think when interdisciplinary pursuit is not grounded in like one community-oriented goal or one specific direction, it can leave you feeling a little lost. But in my case, accessibility, there's so much about it, right? There's the economic side, which I've become more interested in recently. There's policy, there's design, which was how I got my start. But also there is the medical aspect. So much of the problems I was seeing, I think, one could have been enhanced with better quality medical care, better attention to disability, better follow-up. And also how I got interested in my area of medicine was because in the beginning I was advised to take a biology class because so much of design relies on understanding ergonomics and biological conditions. So if you're designing something for people with disabilities, understanding biology is important. So that's where I got my start. And then I realized what I was saying earlier, that so much of the problem is the bridge between the medical and social spheres of disability. I've always enjoyed biology, like, as a passion, but I realized that physicians and people in the medical field in particular have a lot of power in terms of including accessibility and improving accessibility beyond like physically helping people to improve their quality of life by reducing the pain that disability could bring. Beyond that, when someone has a disability, by connecting them to social spheres and integrating their knowledge of design, of technology, they allow people to more fully become independent faster and feel more confident. And I loved the one-on-one interaction that I saw working in clinical contexts which I was missing in something only working with products. So that's like sort of how I decided that I wanted to be interested in more the clinic side, and then I got interested in medicine from there.
Have you ever seen Dhruv's ergonomic mouse?
Ergonomic mouse?
No.
No, I have not.
Bro, I can't let this slide right now.
Man, I have an ergonomic mouse. Shout out to the dudes who made that. It's
Bro,
like
can't even-
it looks like a shark fin kind of, but I like it because instead of a mouse like this, you move it like this, so your radius and your ulna aren't like crossed, and I don't know, it's just comfortable. But I get clowned on it every time. I've been getting clowned on since freshman year, but a man who knows what he likes, and I like ergonomic mice.
Actually, like, the field of ergonomics has a lot of roots in disability studies. Like, one example that I thought was interesting was the Ames chair. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. The, like, very famous chair.
Mm-hmm.
The wood was actually from splints from war veterans that were having disabilities. So that's just, like, one example of how, like, that's a whole area of research and design called human factors, which is how you make the environment more adaptable to everyday human needs. And that's very in line with accessible design, which is how do you create the environment for the person rather than have the person forced to fit into the environment.
Yeah.
Wait, repeat that last part. What?
How do you create an environment to fit a person's needs rather than force a person's needs to change and keep the environment stagnant?
Very smart.
Yeah. And more broadly, I feel like that also applies socially.
Organic chemistry also, by the way, is very tactile.
Yeah.
A lot of people have models. It's very 3D. It has a lot of the mental mapping that's involved in, things that people who are visually impaired face far sooner than us sighted children who go to Orgo and are like, oh, things are 3D and we can't.
That's another thing. I find it very there's a long-standing saying on the Outta Pocket podcast, everybody's built different. And I find as an orgo tutor here, it's so interesting to me that some people are like very naturally inclined to be tactile and think about things in 3D ways. And so visualizing organic molecules, like I don't mean to like sound like arrogant, but like that, it just came naturally to me when I first started learning orgo. Like it wasn't like super trippy to start like manipulating molecules in my head, but I was finding like a lot of like my peers and a lot of my tutees, like it's a tough, like it's a really tough skill to get. And for a while, I mean, pretty much up until this conversation, I was thinking that's kind of like a given, that's a fact. People are coming at it from different levels. How can we then make tutoring and learning more accessible from there? But after this conversation, I'm thinking like, what if tactile learning is kind of where this all begins? You know, what if there is a way in which like introducing models like what you're saying from a very early age kind of like enhances these skills early on, or at least like introduces them early on in a way that's like educationally, I don't know. Yeah,
and I guess that's like also another interest for my or reason for my interest in medicine was that I think what separates a competent physician from a great physician is being able to like work with someone where they're at and find a solution that works for them. In so many cases there's like multiple options that you can provide to someone, multiple decisions that you can take, but if you are able to sort of like figure out someone's existing strengths and try and figure out the best solution for them, I feel like that is literally practicing design thinking in an everyday life area with real world consequences. And I sort of just like fell in love with that idea, as well as like how much time, energy could be saved just by bringing a disability studies perspective to medicine. Like my question is always, how do we ensure that we make medical care the best it can be so that people are having quality lives for as best as they can be, but ensuring that quality of life continues even when medicine fails.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And getting back to the sort of out-of-pocket transition from earlier.
Make it accessible, bro.
Yeah. When, I forget when we initially had this conversation, but Ali and I had a conversation a long time ago about the elderly, and like
there's,
the place of
Andrew's lunch.
yeah. I remember it was an Andrew's lunch over yakisoba bowl. Was that last semester?
It was last
Must have
semester,
been.
yeah.
But I think like one thing I was like kind of grappling with was like, it's so interesting that first of all we even have this like broadly generalized like the elderly. You know, we have this concept in our head, and it's jokes like haha like as you get older your knees they hurt and your back and whatever, and you lose vision, you lose sight, and there's all these sort of like preconceptions we have as society as to what aging means, but as we know it's not monolithic. Everyone like experiences aging differently, and more importantly the like how we will if we are like I suppose fortunate enough to make it to that age, we will start like interacting with our world differently, and people start interacting with us differently. I forget what spurred on that conversation, but I thought it was just kind of messed up that like we kind of think about the elderly in the way we do sometimes, and that like I don't know.
The conversation was basically somebody I know had a bit of a medical little incident, and they're older, and I remember like speaking to them, and I was like, because it was a relatively serious thing, and I was like, and they were kind of like, don't worry about it, I'm fine. And the conversation we kind of had was around like the elderly and like, I guess wanting to maintain their autonomy and like not feel like
right.
I don't know, just like everybody, like the entire world has to worry about them, and like that they're not like as far as I'm as far as the legal definition goes, like a dependent. Like,
right.
Dependents are like kids, and then the elderly, like after a certain age, you become a dependent.
And maintaining autonomy is a large part. Like individual autonomy is a large part of what you're like big point you're making here. And also, in my mind, I think like although there is. I think like viewing at it through this lens helps highlight its importance. I think individualistic societies highly value autonomy. Once again, individualism and collectivism are like broad extremes on a spectrum, and there's plenty of stuff in between. Everything is always in between. But collectivist societies sort of emphasize this maintaining of like a social harmony or a social fabric. And early on, like something that's really stuck with me is like early on in Western societies or individualistic societies, children are socialized as, emphasizing emotional autonomy and self-expression, whereas in more collectivist societies, children are sort of like their autonomy to express their emotions is kind of maybe not inhibited, but kind of discouraged in socialization. In like this really cool study that I read, and because and I say that to say like we think of autonomy as like this very deeply ingrained value we have here growing up in the United States, and it's interesting how to investigate how. I think there's a little bit of wiggle room, right? Like I don't think it is possible for everyone to maintain complete autonomy in any stage of their lives the entire time. Interdependence is important. Relying on others and trusting each other is important. But at the same time, knowing that you have like the autonomy and the will to make your own decisions and do your own thing, and also knowing when to rely on other people, that's the line, right? So I think this all boils down to when people start conflating like going back to the example of the elderly, why doesn't this person want to rely on me is not the right like mindset, I think. Although I'm sure there are plenty of stubborn people who, wouldn't take the help even if they did need it. But
Yeah, that's a big issue. How do you, I guess, create a philosophical change that asking for help is not a sign of weakness and in fact is a way to build your social connections and build things with others. It's like also so cool to see certain design interventions that aren't project-based or aren't product-based but socially based. I am co-teaching a class this semester at Brown called Gero Design, which is about accessible design for the elderly, and I'm running it with my dear friend and way more accomplished than me, peer Chris Liu, who has dedicated his whole undergrad experience and high school life to improving the lives of the elderly. So shout out Chris, the best person ever. But for our project, we're working on a narrative resource guide where basically we're interviewing elderly people in Rhode Island about their stories, how they've maintained their independence, if they, how they've learned to accept interdependence, what hobbies they have. And I've found some really great examples of people sort of socially transitioning to different ways of contributing to society as they age. Like Village Common was an organization that I reached out to, and all of their folks who are elderly are doing really amazing things with volunteering, going out to soup kitchens, tutoring children, illustrating, doing all these things that are so socially beneficial because they have the benefit of time and the benefit of so much wisdom to share with the world. And I'm wondering why that form of aging, that you can sort of find new opportunities and have a new stage of life as you grow older, isn't more widely adopted in American culture, where it's, if you don't contribute in this way, then, your life is sort of on a downhill or your life is over. I think that's a very sad, cynical, and honestly terrifying view of aging, because we're all going to age one day.
Yeah. And, as much as I'd like to keep going on with this conversation, it's been very enlightening. We are, unfortunately, right about time. Ale, you have any more thoughts, concluding remarks?
I think just sentiments that both you and I express, which is thank you so much for coming on the show. You are extremely eloquent, very passionate about what you do. It's very clear, important, and please get this to 600K views, just like Rishika's TED Talk. Hit that like and subscribe button. Nah. Outro music, nah. But yeah, just thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a great time.
Of course. Once again, you've been listening to 101.1 FM, WOPP IP, WDRV IP, WALE IP Providence.
You guys can find us at www.theoutapocketpodcast.com, and Outta is spelled Outta. Through there you can find links to our YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Instagram. Check us out on all of those platforms.
You can also hit us up on our contact page on our website, shoot us an email, let us know what you like, what you think, whether you'd like to be on the show. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
I gotta check that email, bro.
It's been a while. It's gathering dust. There's crickets. But once again, thank you for tuning into the Outta Pocket Podcast. We appreciate it. We'll see you next week. And now Rishika and I are going to make a funny face. All right.
Fucking Tomo partners in crime for real. It's crazy.
Oh, we didn't even talk about that.
Yeah. Check out our Cafe Chai episode. Yeah. Cultural compatibility. Catch you guys later and take care.